Our featured reader, Sarah McCammon, is a national political correspondent for NPR and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Her work focuses on political, social, and cultural divides in America, including the intersections of politics and religion, reproductive rights, and the conservative movement. She is also a frequent guest host for NPR News magazines and has appeared on the BBC, CNN, PBS, and MSNBC. During the 2016 election cycle, Sarah was NPR's lead political reporter assigned to the Donald Trump campaign and previously reported for NPR member stations in Georgia, Iowa, and Nebraska. She lives in Norfolk, Virginia with her husband and 2 children. Please welcome Sarah.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Good, good. As somebody who works in audio, I am really accustomed to asking people to shut things off. I've been in a public place interviewing somebody, can you shut off your fan? I go to restaurants, I say, can you shut off your music? It feels kind of rude, but, and I'm the bane of many hoteliers' existence, I think, because probably all of us in public radio have unplugged devices, refrigerators, all kinds of things to just, have a quiet place to record some audio. So this is normal for me. But in short, just as a brief introduction, I'm going to read a couple of passages from my book, The Evangelicals, which is a hybrid of memoir and reporting that emerged from my own life. I found myself about a decade or so after making my own kind of private, personal break with the evangelical church of my childhood, covering the Trump campaign and doing a lot of reporting on the community that I came from because it became so central to a lot of the conversation about where our politics were and are. So this book grew out of that experience. Jesus stumbled under the weight of the cross. Blood dripped down his face, flowing from the crown of thorns that sat atop his head. A harsh yellow spotlight followed his heavy steps. "We want Barabbas! Give us Barabbas!" shouted an angry mob of men, preferring to free a hardened criminal as Jesus haltingly dragged the cross toward his place of death. All were silent in the darkened sanctuary as men spat on Jesus, mocking and cursing. From one of the middle rows, I stood up on the scratchy industrial brown carpet that covered the floor, craning to see past the adults in their movie theater-style seats. Jesus put down the cross. The spotlight focused in on him, and everything else disappeared, except for the angry men who were beginning to spread Jesus limb by limb across the wooden beams. One of them lifted up a hammer and a thick nail, and I began to sob. At age 4, I understood that this man wasn't really Jesus. He was in heaven with God the Father. But those nails and all of that blood looked very real. And I was afraid for the man who was portraying Jesus in our church Easter pageant. This poor man is dying so we can understand how Jesus died for us, I thought. But as I watched, something combusted inside, and I felt panic and horror wash over me, pushing out tears. "They're killing him," I cried. I remember my parents comforting me from their seats, assuring me that it was only pretend, that the man would be okay, and that while Jesus had suffered and died for us, this man from our congregation would do neither. It wouldn't be the last time I would sit in a church sanctuary, at once moved and afraid, and unsure what was real, uncertain what to believe. But that day, I caught my breath and sat back down on the scratchy carpet. My heart was still pounding as the men hoisted the cross toward the sky, and Jesus cried out in pain. His voice rang out across the high ceiling, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Skipping ahead a couple of pages, I want to pick up that same theme. By the end of 2016, I had become accustomed to being yelled at by angry crowds of people. Assigned to cover the Donald Trump campaign as a correspondent for NPR, it felt almost routine to those of us in the press pen to huddle over our laptops, rushing to meet deadlines, while people passed by to shout insults at us. However large our egos may be in the national media, I don't intend to compare myself to Jesus here. But there were frightening moments in those angry crowds. It also wasn't unusual to engage in warm, friendly conversations with rally-goers, often as they were arriving and Elton John's Tiny Dancer blared over the loudspeaker. They might have made a joke about the liberal media at my expense, but many were equally happy to talk and tell me why they felt so seen and inspired by this real estate developer from New York City. And then the music amped up, Trump took the stage, and the atmosphere would shift. The crowd took on its own energy as Trump pointed toward the risers and cameras at the back of the room, complaining about those disgusting reporters who were the worst people. This quickly became a part of his shtick, a highlight of every rally. Trump would whip the audience into an excited frenzy as they turned to point at us and laugh. In my reporting for NPR, I often describe this moment as very much like a rock concert in which Trump's attacks on the press functioned like one of his greatest hits that the audience would demand to hear before they could leave satisfied. You could feel the catharsis in the air as these crowds poured out their frustrations with the economy, with immigrants, with the Washington establishment they felt disdained them, and directed them at us. Men in red MAGA hats shook their fists and tried to stare us down. I'll always remember one grandmotherly-looking woman in Colorado who leaned in toward the reporter's pen, pointing and shouting, "You're disgusting." We were, it seemed, representatives of the hated establishment on their turf, and we were more than a sufficient proxy. But I wasn't part of that, or I hadn't felt that I was. I had moved to Washington part-time to cover this campaign and spent months reporting on the Republican Party's evangelical base, leaving behind a spouse and 2 young children in Georgia, feeling nervous and out of my element after spending most of my life and career in the Midwest and South. These people in the crowds were, in reality, my people, white, largely Midwestern or Southern Christians. They looked, sounded, and believed a lot like the people in the evangelical community where I'd first learned about God and about politics. When I interviewed them, they'd often bring up their Christian beliefs and their fear about the direction in which they felt the country was going. They saw Trump as someone who could get the country back on track. I'd been away from the church of my childhood for many years, but I watched with curiosity and sometimes confusion as members of the movement and its leaders first wrestled with and then wholeheartedly embraced Trump in numbers large enough to secure the Republican nomination and ultimately the presidency. And the book comes out of conversations I had with a number of people from the evangelical movement or former evangelicals who, because of the events of the last several years, have been reflecting on what it means to be an evangelical. But, as the book goes on, I share more of those stories, but the last passage I want to read tonight, I wrote to kind of paint a picture of what it was like to grow up in what a lot of us call the evangelical bubble. It's sort of its own little world, its own little parallel universe with its own metaphors and media and institutions. And when you grow up inside of it, you at once are isolated from the world, but also believe and are taught that it's your job to save the world. And that has both political and theological implications. So this is the last passage I'll read tonight. It's difficult to save a world you're taught to fear and are carefully sheltered from. In my early years, my own world revolved around our church, on a sprawling campus a short drive over the Kansas state line into the suburbs, and the K-12 school I began attending at age 5, which met in classrooms inside red brick buildings of a small fundamentalist Bible church in Kansas City, Missouri. Aside from my father's family, I didn't know anyone who didn't know Jesus. Our mission field, as we called it, was limited, so every sustained interaction with a potential non-believer felt a little guilty, like a shirked obligation if I stayed silent. One of those rare opportunities presented itself when I was about 8 years old, as my mother correctly determined that I needed to spend several Saturday mornings at what can only be described as remedial skating lessons. At least once a year, my school rented out a rink for a party where we skated to praise and worship songs. Some of the girls would show up with their own beautiful skates from home in pink or white leather and seemingly fly around the rink. And I, in my rented brown skates, would cling to the metal bar, scooting a few steps at a time around the circle and often falling. So my mom found a class where an instructor patiently showed us how to maneuver our skates to slow down and speed up and how to use toe stoppers to brake. I didn't know any of the other kids, but I understood that most of them went to public school. There was one girl about my age that I especially liked. She was friendly and chatty and almost as awkward in the rink. We'd stumble through our lessons together, then talk while we unlaced our skates and put our sneakers on to go home. One week, an unwelcome thought entered my mind. What if God wants me to witness to her? My stomach tightened. What if I'm the only person in her life who can tell her? What if she dies without Jesus because of me? I couldn't shake the sense of obligation. The last week of class came, and all I could think about was what to say to her. As we took off our skates and put on our shoes for the last time, I couldn't bring myself to start with the opening line we'd heard in so many sermons. If you died tonight, do you know where you would go? It felt like a little much for Skateland. We picked up our jackets and I followed her outside. We waited by the front door, watching the car line as each parent pulled up. At any moment, my parents would arrive, whisking me home to clean my bedroom before spending a lazy Saturday afternoon playing in the backyard. I'd probably never see her again. Eternity hung in the balance with seconds to spare. My heart pounded. Now, this is your last chance. I said, do you go to church? Yeah, sometimes. Anyway, my dad's here. And that was that. No big sign from God, no literal come to Jesus moment. Only me, my skates, and my awkward gesture toward heaven. I wouldn't try to make another one for a long time.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we will hear from our regular readers who all have 5 minutes to read, and my Courtney isn't here, who's my timer, so I'm gonna have to cough at you and be awkward when you go over your time. So, just stick to your time, don't make me do it. All right, we'll have 3 readers, and then we'll have a short intermission for you to refill your drinks and stretch your legs, and then we'll have our next 6 readers. So kicking us off, readers, please project, even though it sounds loud to you here. The people in the back would love it if you spoke loudly. All right, kicking us off in fiction, Tamar Shapiro.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me back there? All right, excellent. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from very close to the beginning of my first novel, which is being published in almost exactly a year, September of 2025. It's called Restitution, and very briefly, it's about a family that faces a decision after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Should they try to reclaim the house from which their grandparents fled in the 1950s in East Germany? But a house is never just a house. And with that, I'll start. We were sitting on our front porch, Darren and I, when the Berlin Wall fell. One of the defining moments of our generation, and there we were, huddled in parkas, watching thick November clouds descend over the barren fields of central Illinois. Our car stood in the driveway, parked crookedly like an afterthought, the front passenger seat pushed all the way back, headlights still on, forgotten. In the dimming afternoon gloom, the beams shone wobbly streaks onto cracked concrete. Less than half an hour had passed since we'd returned from the hospital empty-handed. Darren lifting me out of the front seat, his touch as tender as my insides. Yet everything had changed. Yesterday, we'd rushed the contractor along, excited to renovate our house for the baby. A new room on the side, casement windows looking over the fields. Today, construction dust hung in the house, heavy as a shroud, and we sat on the porch watching a lifeless horizon that had felt like home until we returned from a hospital to a loneliness I had not known was possible. We hadn't yet shared our good news with anyone, not even my mom, so there was no one with whom to share our grief, No calls to make. Just the two of us, our jagged breaths casting white clouds toward the gray ones that fell from above. When my bleeding began, our house stood open to the outside, a tarp keeping out the chill, edges flapping. The foundation of the new room had been poured days earlier in heavy, irreversible concrete. I started bleeding after breakfast. Not a spot here or there, but a river that pulled and clawed and turned me inside out. When the intake nurse asked how much blood there was, I told her exactly that. It's a river. Within minutes, I was lying on a hospital bed, Darren next to me holding my hand like a lifeline, his and mine. "You'll be fine," he said, tightening his grip. What he left unsaid pinned me to the bed. What about the baby? I was 3 months pregnant. I'd known about the baby for just over 2, 9 weeks of learning about infant sleep patterns, eating habits, development stages, language acquisition, a fleeting moment, an eternity. "The baby will be fine too," Darren said into the echoing hospital room, but I knew from the deepening shadows on the doctor's face that he was wrong. I heard the words hemorrhage, emergency, and DNC. Darren's fingers massaged a nervous rhythm up and down my arm. Someone gave me sedatives, laid me down under bright lights, told me everything would be all right, and while I slept, they scraped our dreams away from deep inside me. Then we were home again, pulling into the driveway as if nothing had happened, as if we were returning from work, or the library, or a movie, a couple's outing. 2 of us had left, 2 of us came back. Darren went into the house and emerged with blankets, tucking one around me on the porch, keeping the second for himself. When the sky had grown purple, the air too cold, even for our parkas and blankets, Darren said, "I'll make dinner now." Through the door, I heard him turn on the TV, habit, I guess, or a need to fill our empty house with sound. I pulled my hood tighter around my face, disappearing, until I heard Darren shout, "Kate, come here! You need to see this." He was flipping between channels, all showing the same scenes. Dancing and jubilation, gawking crowds from East Germany swarming West Berlin department stores, hammers and chisel taking down bits of the wall. Darren grabbed my hand and said, "Jesus." I was still clenching the blanket. Darren loosened my grip and we watched the white fade from my knuckles. "Imagine your mom, Kate," Darren then said, his voice hesitant, seeking approval to talk about something other than the baby. "She can finally go back to the place she grew up." In my mind, I could hear Mom's voice. "You can only live forward." That's what she'd always taught me. I pulled my hand away from Darren. Why would she want to go to a place she fled from as a child? My question bounced off the walls, tinny and sharp. We both knew it wasn't my real question. What I actually wanted to ask was how Darren could expect me to let go of my sorrow, how he could let go of his own, even for a reason this big. Darren took a quick step toward the TV. Behind him, on the screen, a young man with long hair took off his shirt and swung it around his head, his chest concave, ribs drawing lines across his torso, straight hips gyrating awkwardly. He held his hands high above his head, fingers spread, swaying, and his lips were pulled back, revealing large, uneven teeth. I reached up to my own unsmiling mouth, its corners newly weighted, and as I did so, I saw the man lower one of his hands and run it briefly over his face, wiping away sweat and spittle. I wanted to hate him. On screen, the man finished wiping his mouth. Then he lifted his arms high again and tilted his chin back, his face illuminated by the fireworks of many flashing cameras. And in that moment, he was transformed, radiant. His deep-set eyes glimmered to the beat of the flashes, and his jumbled teeth danced and jostled with the joy of the entire dancing, jostling crowd. I sat down on the rug and began to cry, sharp shards of air in my throat. Next to me, I felt Darren shake too. Together, we breathed in the dust, our hands resting on plaster and debris, our eyes fixed on the pictures of Berlin, on that primal roar of joy and release that surrounded us, taunted us, touched us. I put my palm on the TV screen, feeling the slight fuzz of the static, holding on to the scene as if it could save me. A young woman in jeans and a crop top danced out from under my hand. Her long hair swung side to side with her hips. Her smile was magnetic. "It's amazing," I whispered. "I know it is."
Next in poetry, Tanya Olson.
to read two pieces for you tonight from my latest book, Born Backwards, which came out in the middle of June from the SCS Books. The first poem is called And They Look. And they look alike too, like my mother and I look alike. Every time we see Junior on hee-haw, she notes he could be family. Big moon face, crinkle eyes, smile. Family is like a string to my mother, every member a knot, connected but apart. In heaven, she says, you will recognize every knot on our string, and they will already know you. One day, my mother declares she wants to be the woman who sings backup and plays tambourine for Culture Club. We have just gotten MTV and still watch it like it is a show, turn it on at the top of the hour and sit there for 30 minutes as the videos click by. Helen Terry, I discovered decades later when we have the internet and can wonder about a fact and then find it. My mother, long dead, never searched the internet. My mother never sent an email. Helen Terry, though, is alive. Helen Terry is the big voice in all the great Culture Club songs. Karma Chameleon, I'll Tumble For You, I Know You Miss Me Blind. Hers is the voice that echoes whatever Boy George sings first. I'm a man without conviction. Hers is the voice that holds up his. Progress is seldom a true story. Step up, slide back. But my friend Clark always likes to point out, you and I could spend whole lunchtimes arguing over whether Boy George might possibly be gay. We share pronouns at the start of meetings now, but honestly, I do not want to tell you my pronouns. Sir'd in line, brothered by security, hey guide at the store, these moments of slippage are pure butch triumph. Between the guess, the confusion, the correction, I feel most seen. I know how to watch MTV now, know how to look up facts, have yet to spend meaningful time with my mother since she died. Spotted her in the highest row of a stadium once. She stood when I stood, sat when I sat. They call my name and she pounds her hands together like she is playing a tambourine. She shows up in my dreams, but we speak of nothing real. I know not of an afterlife or if we are gifted some chance to live again. In this, as in so many things, I am a man who does not know. Poet is pig. Poet is pig, born in a barn. Pig pregnant 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 days. Day 4, come a pig. Most pig born tuck in their hooves, slide out head first. Special pig born backwards. Poem arrive any which way. Poet push pen on paper. Push, push, come a poem. Make the poem, you a poet. Pretty poem, pretty pig, squeal pig, waller pig, piggy having roast beef, piggy having none. Creep feed, wean pig, farrow barn to nursery. Farm life, the soft life, straight shot from born to die. No sunburn danger, no coyote harm. Heat lamp, vent fan, farmer play the oldies station all summer long. Why pig love a line dance like poet love a line dance. Pig don't sweat like poet don't sweat. Time release trough, feed 1 pen at a time. Stand there, wait your turn. Lazy pig, porky pig, eat in order the only thing poet or pig willing to fight about. Pig walk itself to finishing barn. Corn, soybean, vitamin, mineral. 16 weeks later, big P pig. Don't every pig make it? Lady pig, lesbian pig, pig of a certain age. Eloise told me, you can knock and knock at poetry's front door, but you will never get in that way. Eloise told me, The lesbian poet dies, and they gather to anoint another. It is never going to be someone like you. It will never be a woman like me. Don't everyone end up some big P poet. Pigs stay on the farm, get shot, stuck, scalded, gutted. Pig man, use every scrap of pig there is. Rooter to the tooter, my mother used to say, and they try to save the squeal. Pigman pile up the heads, make what he called cheese. In it, you can see the shadow of little pig ears. In it, you can see their little snouts. Pig in the wild called boar. Hair wear to tough like steel, teeth grow out to tusk. Tusk made good to dig, tusk made good for gash. Out here, we eat what we want. Out here, we find what we eat. Out here, we write as we will. Out here, we gather every night and sing. I ain't young nor pretty, no twinkle in my eye. If I don't work, I starve to death. Root, hog, or die. Thank you.
Next in fiction, Beth Konkoski.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Rachel, and everyone else within the loop for having me. I'm really excited, and I'm going to be reading 2 pieces of flash from my collection that came out in June that is a mixture of longer short stories and flash fiction. The first one is called Copper Heart. Her voice on the phone does not surprise me. It is my birthday, a time for sisters to call, to remember. But this has not always happened. Details keep her away, busy, trapped. After hello, she will not speak above a whisper, a steady low drone like bees, or the mumbled prayers of monks. I have to move away from my family and the TV to hear her. In the dark of my dining room, a table she never sat around during the 12 years I have lived here, I listen as she describes her drawings of the lake where she plans to kill herself. This has been our story for years. There are 68 pages in the sketchbook, she says, proud and possessed by this fact. In the background, I can hear her, the pages turning, the paper shifting. I am here now, she says, her voice near sleep, and I look through the curtains to my backyard, where darkness has cloaked the trees, canceled all shadows. In California, 3 hours away, she stares at a disk of late afternoon sun over this body of water she has selected. She does not remember it is my birthday. The tremble in her voice, a small hitch at the end of each sentence, like a limp on a very old woman, makes me believe she will do as she says. When I hang up the phone, she will put down her pen, back down the access road, and hit the accelerator. The last page of her sketchbook shows the car partially submerged. My copper heart floats out the window when I go down. I think of the letters she has sent me over the years, the margins packed with hearts and knives, chainsaws and hypodermic needles. These images are the wallpaper of our days. I need it to stop making so much noise. In spite of the miles, the prairies and mountains that separate us, I can see her desperate eyes, darting insects against a screen. I have been here before, yet the stiff fear in my throat is new. I bring words, as always, some mountain hike on my last visit, the childhood nights at our lake house when we watched raccoons dig through the garbage and laughed until dawn, the German lessons she told me she was going to start at the community college. Finally, I remind her of her grandson, living with his dad only an hour from her. The holidays are near. She stops speaking. A soft hiccup travels the dark corridor between us, then a pen scratching. I try to picture slender back black lines dissecting the field of white as she conjures her next move. And this piece is called Grandpa Visits. Night when the wind is strong and memories steam like cocoa, my grandfather appears to tell my son he loves him. I have seen him, a small gust, dart behind the curtain when I come in to check before bed. I pretend not to notice the smell of his pipe, the shade of plaid he leaves when he moves. He must have something important to tell, something antique and great-grandfatherly, perhaps earned from the varnish and wood of his history, the many chairs and buffets he brought back from their own dead places in the barns and attics of the North Country. Last night, for just a moment, he stood still and nodded in my direction. When I tell my mother, she doesn't believe me. When I tell my husband, he ignores me. But Grandpa is delivering a message, and I intend to find out what it is. There must be some way to trap a ghost. At least, I assume the internet will know. And Wiki teaches me in a few easy steps. I can even download an app that will detect the presence of his heat. Not that I need that. And I am to listen for noises like the banging of items on a shelf. They do not mention pipe smoke, or the fact that the space beside the window turns to shades of plaid while I watch. If he would just talk to me once, I would leave him alone to do his haunting. My iPhone firmly in hand, I stare at the screen and wait. Dylan rolls toward the edge of his crib and his arm smacks the wooden slats. I jump, then check again to see if Grandpa's heat has entered the room. The screen is blank, but I feel the tailwind of a memory shift across my skin. He has come. What they say about the thermals on screen is only half correct. There is heat, but also the chill of his passing. Like a thick moment of fog, and then beside the crib, Grandpa's jeans hanging low on his hips, the heavy work shirt tucked into his brown leather belt, and the fisherman's cap on his head. He removes the hat and runs his fingers across the gray hair, sliding it into place. We could have been in his workshop, or on the edge of his garden getting ready to plant tomatoes. Each moment of having watched him, followed him, helped him, floods toward me. There were hours when he taught me without speaking, let me trot like a new puppy just a few paces behind in all his work. He was rarely still, his knotted fingers holding a varnish brush, sandpaper, shovel, hose, or the wooden handles of his wheelbarrow. As I grew older, I carried and settled the details of his chores. In just a decade, he aged and became a voice of directions and desires, needing me to put into practice the many hours I had only been a pair of eyes. He taught me how to work and how to pay attention. Dylan can never have these moments. This barely visible presence in my stories are all he will have of this man who died within days of his birth. Only once did I place my son in Grandpa's arms, the hospital bed in his den, upright as he could barely lift his head or speak above a croaking whisper. I realize as I stand there just how much I miss him. In these months following his death, I have been busy with the details of being a mom, and have wanted to forget the hospital death smell and papery skin, the horrible brown vomit and fevers he was too sick to hide. These memories do not sift through me and bring joy. I want him to visit me because this ghost does not resemble his final year. This ghost does not writhe in pain or throw bedpans at the wall. This ghost is not the dying grandfather I nursed, but the grandfather of my childhood. The grandfather of a past I want to relive, recapture, put on like a pair of scuffed boots that know the angles and knots of my feet. And then this grandfather, here now, reminds me he is still mine. So I put away my phone and leave them, hoping my tiny baby will recall some grandfather relic passed to him in the shadows. Thank you.
Our Authors Corner spotlight this month is Mai Sennaar, and she is here to promote her book, They Dream in Gold. Please give her a warm welcome.
I think that'll do. You might put it down again if you. Oh, you good. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mai Sennaar, and I came to the Inner Loop, I want to say like 8 years ago, when this book was a short story. And it's beautiful to be here again. They Dream in Gold is coming out from Sarah Jessica Parker's publishing imprint. I'm the fourth of her first 4 books, and she's a phenomenal publisher and very much understands and has supported this story. I'm going to read just a little bit, and anyone can cough or do something when I've gone too long, but I'm going to try to be brief. If you want to know what the book is about, the jacket is on the back of it, but a quick summary. A couple meets in 1968 in the summer that MLK is assassinated, and the girl is African American and the guy is Senegalese, and the story is the story of their families and an opportunity to discuss the nuances and complications within diaspora versus a lot of the stories that externalize race. This is an opportunity to look within a single diaspora and see how those tensions, what they say about being a human being. And the lead character is seizure prone. He's a singer and very talented, but his body sometimes gets in the way because of his seizures. So here we are. On a wooden stage constructed the night before, Mansour uses his right foot like a hammer, pounding on the downbeat, setting the music in motion. The Irishman and the other musicians lay down each melody beside him, completing the spell over the infinite pool of dark eyes and olive skin below them. They sway and scream and dance. It is May of 1969, and the towns of northern Spain are alive with their music. Their car gives out, so they borrow an old Fiat and drive through the night to the next town and the town after that. They pick fat black olives out of rich stews and force full cases of cheap spirits into a trunk that is already crowded with their instruments. They all stay high and a little famished, terrified that the old car will stop midway between towns like the last one had, but this one doesn't. After Barcelona, the tiny towns have no banks, and they worry that their pocket money will run out, and it does. Twice on their way farther north, they barter on the corners of ancient cobblestone blocks with 4-minute concerts for dinner and cigarettes. Mansour holds the electric guitar on his lap as he devours roasted lamb and Spanish rice with his hand. Liam watches him form the rice into tiny little balls he throws down his throat. The Irishman, Liam, does most of the driving, well into the morning hours, while the rest of the men start into their dreams. Delaying sleep, he drives for as long as he can, eventually pulling off on the side of some road. As he has done before these past few nights, for some reason, he dreams of death, of a dying man. Sometimes the man has Mansour's face, sometimes Kiefer's. Kiefer is a black dude, African-American dude who's been murdered earlier in the book, so sorry, but I had to explain. The scene always on the same street where Kiefer had collapsed. It is a recurring dream that doesn't seem to have an ending. Some of the roads in northern Spain are shrouded in sparkling rubble and dirt. Others are lined with privately owned citrus trees. They pass ancient villages where the flat houses match the color of the earth. They row across a brown river to play at a university auditorium with no windows. At the climax of a concert, with over 1,000 bodies breathing in the same stagnant air, harmonizing with the guitar riff, for the first time on stage, Mansour has a seizure. With his collapse, the crowd is still, and Liam and the trumpeter lift Mansour from the stage and carry him to the wings. The Irishman, having dreamt now thrice of Mansour's death, had not expected him to awaken. Liam shakes as they walk out of the venue, grateful to God that the night is pitch black, that Mansour and the others cannot see the way he cries for his friend. They do not make it to the car quietly. The crowd follows, and theirs is a palpable and wild love that even Liam feels. Among them, even here in Spain, Liam notes the Africans. They always find their way to Mansour's shows, even in the most remote European towns. Mansour, whose eyes are still low from the seizure, stares into their faces like a preacher. Even after blacking out on stage, the Irishman can surmise from Mansour's manner that the African is giving his people words of encouragement, perhaps words from scripture. But once inside the car, the African's mood darkens, he becomes himself again, and he again indulges in spirits, picks drunken fights with the other musicians, and eventually crawls into a corner in the car and sings himself to sleep. At the edge of a village town, deep into the night, they pass an old church. Having been possessed by these strange dreams for several nights, The Irishman parks the car and goes inside while the other men sleep soundly. Inside the stately old church, the wild winds have opened to the numerous windows. Liam kneels in the first pew as he thinks upwards to pray. He hears then deep wailing, a guttural cry carried in by the wind of the otherwise silent dawn. It is the voice of Mansour. Shall I stop? Okay. The Irishman comes out to the car to find Mansour passed out outside, sleeping soundly against the car's back tire. The Irishman shakes his friend by the shoulders, worried again, until Mansour opens his eyes. He helps Mansour back into the front seat of the car, and they light fresh cigarettes, and they watch the sunrise in silence. Thank you. One more thing. The Interloop is phenomenal, what they're doing for writers. Our publishers work very hard, but this supplementation really helps us, so thank you. And in that spirit, my book is here. Kramer's has taken on my book, which is wonderful, and they're here for sale, so if you enjoy, get the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Mai. Love that origin story. Reading your short story at the Interloop. Love it. All right, next in fiction, Sydney Sue.
Hello, I'm going to read an excerpt from a short story that I've been working on for my thesis. So this is called Man Eater. The porcelain sink is off-white with a thick ring of dirt encircling the drain, grime from years' worth of brushing teeth and shaving barely grown facial hair built up until the white turned yellow with use. When I look in the mirror, I see my face obscured through the streaks where washcloths and hands wipe away condensation. I can see myself, only just, with my lipstick smudged and eyes watering. Below me, the bath smells of mildew and rot. I don't think this bathroom has ever been cleaned. When I turn on the faucet, I reach for the soap, only to find an empty dish with the last remains dry and molding at the corners. I wash my hands with nothing but water. The man is sitting on the couch when I exit the bathroom. His arms hang over the edge, his fingers petting the fabric on the backside of the couch. We are supposed to be having sex. That's what everyone assumed when we left the bar together. He put his arm around my waist and asked if I wanted to get out of here. Now my lipstick is smudged and I'm subject to his many posters of the 1991 Chicago Bulls. I approach the couch, sliding on the upholstery next to him. He straightens up, his shirt stretching under the pressure of his movements. Under his arms, I see the faint outline of sweat seeping through his blue dress shirt that is too tight against his body. Our lips return to each other, my lipstick smearing against his mouth once more, striking red over his cheeks, just as his hands run up along the inside of my thighs, likely wanting my skin to remain smooth and hairless beneath his coarse fingertips. I don't remember the last time I shaved. I don't remember the last time touch turned me on. My stomach is hollow with anticipation, a certain drawl that reminds me that this is happening, that he's here too. Sometimes it's difficult to want when a man is lying on top of you, whispering in your ear, "Do you like that?" And after a while, you can't tell if he's trying to turn you on or if he's genuinely asking, "Please tell me, is this good?" And it all gets a bit awkward because you can't even remember his name. If I was a different person, the begging would have gotten me off, but as he whispers in my ear, his fingers fumbling over my underwear, I had the strange suspicion that he spoke to me as if I'm his mother. My underwear comes off, as do his pants. He's trying to put his dick inside of me and makes a sly comment about how it might not fit. I watch him fumble around for a moment before pure ecstasy washes over his face. Then terror, as his eyes that were distracted by the posters on his wall widened to look down at me. As I left his apartment, I examined my dress for evidence of what had just happened. Brief blood blots along the hem of my blue summer dress, where it was bunched up around my waist. Otherwise, I remained clean. On the street, I duck into the alleyway to remove the remains from my body. I reach up, my fingers exploring where his once were, to pull out the blunt flesh of his half-digested penis. I deposit it on the street, thinking about the rats who will now eat plentifully. This occurrence began 5 years ago, and I can't help myself. I've stopped seeking out cures or hoping for an alleviation of consequences. I tell them beforehand that I'll chew them up and spit them out. Men never believe me when I say this. They'll laugh and tell me that they've been with enough women to know their way around the bedroom, then cry when I emasculate them. It grumbles inside of me, digesting fully and spitting up again. The blood drips onto the ground, droplets creating small splatters of liquid that accumulates over the concrete as I stride down the sidewalk. It stretches out, reminding me of its existence. I'll never outlive this. I'll never run from this fast enough. And yet I keep desiring all the same. I want to want without this violence. Thank you.
Next in poetry, John Kropf.
Good evening, everybody, and I want to start off by, of course, always thanking Courtney and Rachel. The Interloop is a fantastic forum, and I just want to second what was said earlier, so thank you for putting this on. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio, Great Lakes area, summers in Michigan, and I've come out with my first book of poetry called A Midwestern Heart. So I'm going to try to sample a few poems for you tonight from that. It's put out by Bottom Dog Press, which is a very small independent press in Ohio, of all places. And the first poem is called Working with the Elements. Night, and awake in bed, I hear voices outside, voices of 14-year-olds, voices that belonged to me 30 years ago. The time when you have never felt so carefree, so cool, so immortal, everything in life before you, and you barely recognize this. The 14-year-olds fill their senses with deep hues of the northern latitudes and the energy and ozone of the big lake. I can't go outside and join them. It's not my time. But hearing voices and waves is the nearest thing to time travel. I see myself at a bonfire on a beach, maybe flirting with a girl, under the same constellations, absorbing the same light and water. My daughter is out there in the darkness, the old elements firmly embedded in her. This one's very short, so don't blink. It's called Wild Town. I ran wild, then ran away from a northern Ohio town. But I took the town and my wild ways with me. And this one is, if there's one thing that makes me feel connected to the Midwest, and I have been here for longer than I care to admit, it's mowing my lawn. Whenever I mow my lawn, it takes me back to being in the Midwest. And this poem is called A Midwestern Boy Mows the Fields of the Republic. I mow my lawn in shrinking concentric squares like a disappearing island. But no lawn is an island. Why not push past my boundaries to the neighbor's yard? I'll need time off from work as I race up and down suburban streets, connecting rivers of lawn with the Capitol lawn, New England town greens, and Kentucky bluegrass, which requires a stately pace to please pampered thoroughbreds. Midwest 100-yard coliseums require a precision coif, no dreams in artificial turf. Is it any wonder why it was abandoned and returned to earth? My vast grid extends to summer lawns of memory, front yards of modest Ohio towns, to the graveyards of my grandparents. I mow Little League fields in diagonal textures, the kind you see during baseball highlights. I'm left mowing in the dark one giant rolling lawn of the great republic, from sea to shining sea. And I'm going to close with one called Westerly Course. Driving west into an unknown country is a deliberate mystery. You don't know what you'll need or what you'll find on the radio. The land pushes up green waves and sand hills where birds hide during the day and you hear them at night. At the end is the ocean, where the sun says, enough. Time to sit still on the shore and let the waves do the talking. Thank you very much.
Next in fiction, Shawn Geegbae.
Hello, everyone. So this is a short story I wrote. It's called The Island. Just 5 short chapters. Here's the preface. Perhaps the sentiments contained in the following pages are not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit of thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right, and at first raises a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1776. Chapter 1. The only sound that the boy heard was the surge of the sea. The swim to the island was a mile or so long. Waves fell back, pulling sand from beneath his hands and knees as he crawled out of the ocean slowly and heavily on all fours. He was average in height, cinnamon in color, and 10 in age. Large brown curls covered his head and fell past his collarbone. The boy's stomach swelled and shrank as he panted from exhaustion, and lifting up a hand, he attempted to block the fury of the sun, but it beat across his shoulders and back, nonetheless quickly drying the salt water from his slender body. His legs, now fatigued, progressed slowly along the hot, beady sand towards the welcoming arms of knotted banyan trees. Within a few minutes, he had disappeared out of sight and into the tangled greenery. Parched with thirst and ravenous with hunger, the boy wandered for some time in search of sustenance. He found none and remained there starving in sun-scorch. Chapter 2. Fiona. The miniature hippopotamus was the first to see him. She stiffened defensively but could not furnish fuel to her legs for a quick escape. With shaking knees, she spoke internally. It's a lion. Fiona closed her eyes tightly, reopened them, and sent her gaze back on the boy who was a few feet away. The wisest of all the island's creatures, Fiona was short but lacked shape, and was large but lacked strength. The boy broke the silence first. Hello, he offered up to her from the ground below. She stared out at him, questioning first her eyes and then her head. Mustering up courage from her once yellow belly, Fiona extended a heavy hoof towards the boy and shook his hand. Nice to meet you, she said, and smiled with etiquette. After a brief moment, the boy slipped a hand along his stomach, felt his ribs, and spoke. Is there anything to eat on this island? Now this question the hippo could not answer and stood for some time in thought. Chapter 3. Stars began to appear upon the ebony sky one by one as Elred, the pygmy goat and self-proclaimed leader of the island, strolled along with his head high and his heart singing to him. As he went along, his footsteps fell on Fiona's ears like rain on the skin. Elred glanced her way, and before he could produce a sound, his heart stopped beating and became immobile. Drowning in the image before him, Elred could not free his tongue to speak and began to suffocate from the sight of the lion. His legs were shackled by fear, and in his worrying and suffering, only shallow breaths could be heard. Chapter 4. By nightfall, all the animals of the island had gathered there, and there was much discussion as to what should happen next. He should eat meat, Elred said. As the leader of the island, I'm the rightful person that should be sacrificed. No, it should beat me, yelled another animal. I would taste the best. No, let me do it. Pick me, pick me. Speaking again, but with more conviction, Elbert could continue with a martyred expression. He told me in confidence that he wanted to eat me. Lions love to eat goats. They're meat eaters, you know. Additionally, I'm quite sure I will be the most filling and nutritious for him. No one agreed with this statement, and the fighting continued. The boy labored under the misconception for a few moments, confused. As the wrinkles from his forehead began to subside, he looked up and saw, tucked within the dark leaves of the trees, brightly colored fruits. I don't want to eat you, he told them. I want to eat those up there, the fruit, and reached out his hand and pointed. Like emeralds, the fruit shined with beauty as the boy's tongue became wet with desire. Those up there, questioned Gerald the meerkat, but lions don't eat fruit. They eat meat. They eat us. The boy growled and replied, but I'm not a lion. This statement caused a sensation among the animals as they shouted with laughter. I told you cats were feather-brained. You must pick one of us to eat, they insisted. Oh, to be eaten by a lion, the king of the jungle, that would be a thing of splendor, an aspiration for any animal on the island. The stir persisted as everyone shouted for selection. Chapter 5. That's enough, bellowed out Elred, who was unhappy with everyone's conduct but his own. You all are acting so desperate, so needy, quite greedy, you know. He eyed them with feelings of disdain and pausing for a moment, took this posture of a statesman. They say you are what you eat, you know. You see me, I'm calm and simple, great for the mind and the body. He walked with grace, showing off his figure to the crowd. I'm sweet and delicious, a little ambitious, but far from pernicious. Eyes rolled and repulsion flashed across the animals' faces at the conclusion of his monologue. Ignoring Elred, they all cried around the board once more. If you give me some food now, then tomorrow I will surely choose one of you to eat, the boy said. Think of it as an appetizer, a way to cleanse my palate. To this they agreed and brought down several large fruits from atop the tree. The boy beamed with gluttony at the prosperity before him. Don't give him any, yelled Elred. He's delirious with hunger. It might kill him, you know. All eyes shifted in unison back to Elred. When hunger becomes so intense, one can suffer delusions, you know. That's why he keeps saying he's not a lion. Upon hearing these words, the boy, with eyes wide, became white with disbelief and then red with anger. He cast an angry eye over the goat and looked Elred up and down, as if deciding how he would cook, to eat him pan-fried or poached. Here, quite understandably, everyone fell silent as stones. Wearing the expression of the academic, Fiona stepped forward and the question settled on her half-open mouth. Lion, is it not true that you've been eating animals for centuries? Look at your teeth, those canines, big and strong, powerful and long. How much more shall our convincing going on? At first, the boy had all sorts of things in mind. Alarm jumped in his eyes. Having a conversation with himself, he said internally, "The words from above, fruits with seeds shall be your meat." As you can well imagine, Elred beamed with gloom that he had not thought of this question to ask the lion. He stood on the side watching under the torture of obscurity. To his ears came the boy's reply. These things were once tradition, but can we go through history too stubborn to change? Can things be justifiable because they are tradition? Elred's features blushed with delight as Fiona was rebuttal. He showered thank yous and unaffectionate kisses upon her in his mind and smiled big, his face expanding at the sides. This not being the time to eat your words or swallow your pride, Elred interrupted once again with starvation on his lips. Mr. Lion, thank you.
Next in poetry, Emily Tuszynska. I was at the farmer's market just last Saturday. Yeah, thanks. And they had a big sign at one of the booths saying it was the last week for peaches. Couldn't believe it's the last week already, and you could buy a crate for $25 if you get a bushel. I said, no, thank you.
But this is a poem about what happens when you don't say no and you buy that bushel of peaches. Peaches. All afternoon, I've been canning peaches in batches, a heat and a sweetness filling the low-ceilinged kitchen, glittering mason jars, steaming dry on spread towels, big pots of water and syrup frothing up and subsiding, the canner constantly chattering, rattling its jars, the crate under the window emptying slowly. Later, I lay under the slow-turning fan, closed my eyes, and saw peaches, peach pits, and shucked peach skins. Their flesh was so golden, the white walls took on their color. The skin of my fingers was soft and sticky with juice. You came to the room and hesitated, hand on the door frame, said my name softly, distinctly, to see if I slept. Each syllable came separately into my consciousness, like the half globe of a late summer peach, slipped from a ladle into its jar of thick syrup, settling down to cup itself around the half that came before. Probably it's not a surprise to know that after those juicy peaches, not too long after we had 3 children, one after the other. So I'm gonna read a poem about that altered state that you enter when you're getting up in the middle of the night with one kid after the other. You sort of lose all sense of self pretty soon. You're not sure where you end and the universe begins. This poem is called At Home. At home in this small house, made smaller still by the massive hardwoods overhead, the children wake us every hour, first one calling and then another, as the moon floats through the window like a slow bubble through syrup. It shrinks as it rises, finally arcing up and out of the window frame and releasing the house into shadows through which we walk in turns as walls give way and ceilings drift into rustling leaves. Experience has taught me a division of the self, one half of the mind still sleeping while the other wakes to watch the body carry its mute comfort like a glass of water to a sleeping child. I think a part of me will be alive in this night forever, rolling to meet your returning warmth, rising to leave you sleeping as I balance across a cool floor that materializes and vanishes underfoot. Your song as you walk the baby is a strand of dream from which I wake to find myself singing, holding a child dense and solid with sleep. Fans drag damp air in a vaporous river through the rooms. From the treetops, 1,000 insects cry, and the sound sinks straight through me. Every barrier is lifted, every boundary broken. Even my heart is unguarded. Are you still there? A child whispers. And whose is the voice that answers? Thank you, Inner Loop.
in fiction, Varun Gauri.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to all the wonderful people at Interloop for everything that you do. I'm extremely excited tonight to be holding a physical copy of my debut novel, coming out 3 weeks from today, published by the Washington Writers Publishing House. It's mostly a love story about two young people who've dated other people but choose to have an arranged marriage anyway, and it turns out to be more than they bargained for. But it's also a story about politics in small-town Ohio and the Indian diaspora. My protagonists are Avi and Mina. Avi is running for township trustee. His opponent in the election, Jim, launches a series of inflammatory attacks about arranged marriage, saying it's not American. Avi fights back, amplifying rumors that Jim is having an extramarital affair with the heiress of a big cattle empire. At this event at the Lions Club, Avi decides to twist the dagger. At the curry in a hurry in the food court, and with Coley's help, Avi revamped the closing remarks of his stump speech, emphasizing that Southgate had to move on, look to the future, not get bogged down in memories of old glory. Writing fueled his anger, and he couldn't resist extravagant allusions to Jim's affair and his bovine preoccupations, aka the daughter of Iowa cattle. Wordsmithing turned out to be an enjoyable distraction from his complicated marriage. The Lions Club was packed. The various club officers in their red and yellow vests, sweat seeping through the armpits of their shirts, took up the front 2 rows. The club president, Avi's old high school counselor, was a short, squat man with eczematous skin who sported a white tuxedo top and red bow tie. Behind them were batches of businessmen in polos and businesswomen in blouses. Avi's many uncles, family members, and his campaign volunteers were scattered around. He publicized the event so widely that, hopefully, the Lions could see the power of the South Asian community. Bob, eager for his ice cream shop franchise once his friend won, introduced Avi to the audience as my Dharma chum. Avi started by talking about the disputed ambulance arrangement, his sales tax proposal, and his stance on patrol car coverage. Then he discussed the implications of rezoning Washington Woods as commercial. There would be new infrastructure, retail. He talked about the business opportunities, local investing and local consuming, moving beyond agriculture, integrating into the world economy, generating value and resources that could be used to help the needy. And yet, the importance of traditional values. Macon Southgate. His vision was perhaps different from the factories of yore and the verdant fields, but so promising. A mall with a pizzeria, a taco stand, a community center, an ice cream parlor, maybe even a smartphone store and a yoga studio. He adopted hushed tones for his closing remarks. I know about ghosts. In my parents' old neighborhood in the mother country, there are stone palaces, courtyards, once the playgrounds of kings and princesses, are now homes for goats and chickens, wandering cows, and trash. Ghostly memories of former glory. Sadly, if my opponent has his way, Southgate may be headed there. Closed factories and boarded up homes, drugs and despair, nothing but memories for sustenance. We won't ever be a sexy town. We'll keep our old-fashioned values. We want a solid arrangement, a marriage, not dangerous liaisons. My opponent's policies are nothing but short-term flings. He wants to grease the economy with quick fixes, lubricate for his own pleasure. He thinks he's a cowboy lassoing a bull, but ask yourself who he really is. Might he be feeding us cock and bull stories while pursuing his own personal cash cow? It's time for change in Southgate. Change is possible, but we have to command it. We have to will it. The audience clapped. Someone wolf whistled. Avi tapped the lectern nervously. So, you're saying you don't lubricate? The guy shouted. The pot-bellied man laughed and looked left and right at his buddies. Avi scowled and started to respond, but one of the boys in back was running to the mic. Excuse me, may I ask a question? The boy pulled back his hoodie. He was dark-skinned, South Asian. That was a relief. I would like to share my story. My parents took me to our home village to visit my grandfather, who they said was sick, But as soon as I arrived, they stole my mobile, my passport, and my credit cards. It was a trap. The room quieted. People were listening with interest. But why was this relevant? The relatives told me they knew I was gay. They found a village girl for me. She would cure me of my sexual perversion. I said, no, I'm truly gay. But I had to marry her. Otherwise, I had no way of returning to Ohio. They forced me. When we came home, I told the girl the full story. She left me. Now my family has disowned me. What the hell? Avi thought of saying that arranged marriage can be for gay people too. It's about your outlook, not about sexual orientation, but a clamor was rising. He wasn't sure whether that comment would inflame or douse the ruckus. What had he been thinking, inviting all these strangers? A woman from the posse in the back stood and said in a piercing voice, "They made me marry my cousin. They locked me into a room with him. They fed us one chapati a day until we agreed." A girl dressed in bright clothing with a painted face said, "They bought me, they trafficked me, they treat us like goats." Someone shouted, "Avi Sarawat collected legal campaign contributions at his own wedding," and the posse started hissing. This was a flipping setup. Jim must have rounded up these people, wildcard radicals from Cleveland or Columbus or someplace. Of course arranged marriage was complicated and could be abused, but why throw out the baby with the bathwater? Stop child marriage, stop forced marriage, stop arranged marriage. Youths in back were chanting in unison. Chaos erupted, shouting. Several people ran to the podium. Avi's father remained seated in a chair in back, shaking his head, staring down. The businessmen in front leaned back and looked around, seemingly enjoying the spectacle. The club president dimmed the lights and, in an effort to restore order, asked his fellow officers to join him in singing the club anthem, "We Serve." As the heavy-set men in red and yellow vests belted out the song, people started to file out. Thank you.
All right, let's have a round of applause for all of our readers today.